Watching teenagers receive prison sentences is always a tragic scene in any courtroom. While most young people make it through their difficult years without trouble, some commit acts so evil they stun entire communities. Today we'll look at 9 unforgettable cases of teens reacting to life sentences. Logan MacPhail, then aged 16, stalked Holly Newton for an hour through Hexham, Northumberland, in the UK, before stabbing her 36 times in an alleyway. CCTV showed him wearing a snood and a baseball cap and ducking out of sight as he followed Newton and her friends around the town center. He also stabbed a teenage boy who intervened to try to stop the attack, which caused the weapon to break and the blade to snap. MacPhail was convicted of murder following a trial at Newcastle Crown Court in August 2024 and sentenced at the same court. A month before, the judge lifted a reporting restriction which had prevented the media from identifying him due to his age. Mr. Justice Hilliard's sentencing said MacPhail, who has autism and learning difficulties, did not accept that their 18-month relationship was over.
So, that you made the decision to stab a 15-year-old girl to death with a knife which you were carrying unlawfully in a public place. I'm satisfied that earlier in January 2023, Holly indicated that the relationship was at an end, and you realized that this time she meant it for good. You were not able to accept that. You were obsessed with Holly, and by your desire to resume the relationship.
The night before MacPhail murdered Newton, he traveled 40 miles from his home in Gateshead to hers in Haltwhistle, Northumberland, where he hung around for hours. MacPhail was eventually taken home by police who had been alerted by his mother that he was missing. Newton's mother, Michaela Trussler, was concerned enough to contact the police and arrange to speak to an officer about MacPhail's behavior the next afternoon. That same afternoon, MacPhail stabbed Newton to death. MacPhail, who met Newton when they both attended Army Cadets, a military organization attached to the British Army. MacPhail claimed he never planned to attack her, but wanted to use the knife to kill himself. The jury rejected his story. In a victim statement, Trussler described not being able to be with her fatally injured daughter in hospital because her body was a crime scene. The mother of 4 said Newton and MacPhail had a typical teenage relationship at first, but her daughter came to realize he was controlling her. Trussler believed her daughter was the victim of domestic abuse, although she was under 16 at the time, and was caused emotional turmoil by her ex-partner. The night before the murder, MacPhail tried repeatedly to be allowed into Holly's home and hung around for hours, trying to convince one of her siblings to open the door. And this led to the victim's mother questioning what would have happened to the rest of her children if he had entered.
Like her to go out, he didn't want her to go out with her friends. He needed to know where she was all the time, even if she was just at home. He wanted to know what she was doing. We changed her passwords on all of her social media. There was just a lot of controlling behaviours going on. He definitely felt that if he couldn't have her, then nobody could. What we didn't know is he meant it.
Holly was on. The Crown instructed psychiatrists to determine whether MacPhail was fit to stand trial after that had been raised as an issue by the defense. After the examinations, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 17 years.
5 years detention under Section 250 of the Sentencing Act 2020 to run concurrently with your minimum term, so at the same time. I pass no separate penalty for possessing the knife. Logan MacPhail, for the murder of Holly Newton on the 27th of January 2023, sentences that you are to be detained at His Majesty's pleasure. That could not be for a period less than 17 years in total, because you have already spent 641 days in custody. I have to deduct those days. And so the minimum term I now specify.
17-year-old Fode Kamara was only 15 when he fatally shot McKeever inside her Brooklyn Park apartment on November November 8, 2022. Eric Haynes, McKeever's ex-boyfriend and the father of her young child, was sentenced to life in prison last month for orchestrating the murder. According to the criminal complaint, Kamara told investigators Haynes gave him a gun and ordered him and his brother John Kamara, who was 17 at the time, to scare McKeever's new boyfriend. Fode Kamara said after he entered McKeever's apartment, she approached him with a knife. He then shot her 9 times and accidentally shot his brother in the foot. McKeever's boyfriend fled the apartment through a window and called 911. Fode Kamara pleaded guilty last month as part of a plea deal that saw him testify against 2 other adults involved in exchange for the dismissal of a second charge against him. He chose not to speak during Wednesday's sentencing hearing but did apologize through his attorney. The judge highlighted Fode Kamara's youth and the coercion used by Haynes for the downward sentencing of 130 months instead of 300 months. John Kamara was recently sentenced to 2 years in a juvenile correction facility. Members of McKeever's family spoke after the hearing. Aunt Virginia Taylor said while they're glad he was tried as an adult, they're still frustrated at the idea that he was too young to know better.
This is Fox 9 News at 6.
No matter what age and however they're trying to say that he was manipulated, there's no way that you should be able to walk out of jail in 4, 5 years, 6 years after you took somebody's life.
Fode Kamara was originally offered a plea deal by Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty, who wanted him and his brother to undergo rehabilitation instead of serving time in prison. McKeever's family was outraged and successfully lobbied Governor Tim Walz to intervene and reroute the case to Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison without Moriarty's approval, a move that hadn't occurred in the state for nearly 3 decades.
Excuses on why they did what they did. There is no excuse for stalking. There's laws against that. There's no excuse for breaking and entering. There's laws against that. There's no excuse for assault. You can't walk around and hit somebody. There's law.
Moriarty called Walz's decision undemocratic, and the Minnesota chapter of the National Lawyers Guild expressed its outrage, saying his actions were based on political expediency. Shelby Isaac, 18, shot and killed Eddie Tate II, his girlfriend, and their unborn child on January 22, 2016 in the block of Westchester Circle at Sycamore Lake Apartments parking lot. Once authorities arrived on the scene, they discovered Tate stretched out on the pavement with multiple gunshot wounds. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Tate's girlfriend, Edwina Thomas, was rushed to the hospital in serious condition and later died. She was 6 to 8 weeks pregnant. According to WMC Action News 5 staff, Tate and his cousin had an active hair business named Virgin Hair for US. They carried extensions and wigs between $50 and $250. Defense attorneys believed and theorized that Isaac previously purchased 2 bundles of hair extensions the day of Eddie and Edwina's death. Isaac later contacted him again to buy additional hair weaves. DNA forensic results show Isaac's fingerprints on a receipt inside Tate's car. The receipt was time stamped at the time.
Are y'all ready for the jury? Yes. Are y'all gonna blank that out for?
Judge, since it was pre-marked, we did not think we needed to.
All right, let's bring the jury in.
Remember the last one? It's up on the other side of that little machine.
On February 5th, Judge James Lammy issued a warrant for Shelby Isaac for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Victoria C. was the first suspect arrested in connection to the triple murders. C. faces separate charges from Isaac for being an accessory to murder after the fact. Once Shelby was taken into custody, the documented arrest affidavit C. informed police that she watched Isaac shoot Tate and his pregnant girlfriend, then drove away from the complex. During court time hearing, the 3 murder charges against Isaac were dismissed due to lack of evidence with no probable cause. That same day, a grand jury indicted Isaac on 3 counts of first-degree murder. During opening statements, prosecutors described Mr. Tate dying on the cold concrete in his own puddle of blood, and Thomas dying at the hospital fighting for both her life and the life of her child.
Yes, sir. May I proceed? Thank you. Right. Fighting for her life, fighting for the life of her unborn child. It's a fight that even Thomas ultimately lost. Her boyfriend, Eddie Tate, laying on cold asphalt, laying in a warm pool of his own blood, fighting for his life. A fight that he too ultimately lost. Why? Money. Money from here. How do we get there?
She was only 6 to 8 weeks pregnant. During the trial, prosecutors argued Isaac had met with Tate before the killing and brought $250 worth of weaves and set up another meeting under the impression that she intended to buy more. Once Judge James Lammy read the first guilty count of second-degree murder, Isaac collapsed. She had to be carried out of the courtroom.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder as included in count 1. Signed by the foreperson of the jury. Mr. Aldridge, is that your verdict? Ms. Foster, is that your verdict?
Yes.
Witnesses could hear her screams outside the courtroom. On November 19, 2016, Isaac was charged and found guilty of 2 counts of second-degree murder, 1 count of reckless homicide, and 1 count of criminally negligent homicide. Shelby Isaac was sentenced to 30 years in Tennessee prison for woman. Release date is September 2nd, 2045, with possible for parole, June 20th, 2041. Nicholas Jacob Cruz, born September 24th, 1998, is an American mass murderer who perpetrated the Parkland High School shooting, where he shot and killed 17 people while wounding 17 others on February 14th, 2018. Cruz had been known for behavioral problems since preschool, and as a teenager on social media, he shared his obsessions with mass shootings and expressed racist, anti-Semitic, homophobic, and xenophobic views. He was a member of the Junior Reserve Officers Training Corps. He legally purchased various firearms prior to the shooting.
Holy.
Oh my God!
On February 14, 2018, Cruz opened fire on students and staff at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, murdering 17 people and injuring 17 others. Cruz, a former student at the school, fled the scene on foot by blending in with other students and was arrested without incident approximately 1 hour and 20 minutes later in nearby Coral Springs.
What's going on? What's going on today, bro?
The demons, man.
Demons?
Voices.
Yeah, no problem.
Voices.
Voices and demons?
Where's the voices? What the f***? Where the f*** am I? Holy sh**. What happened?
Shut up.
Just be quiet, man.
Cruz told a psychologist that he committed the shooting on Valentine's Day because he believed that no one loved him. At his initial arraignment the day after the shootings, Cruz was charged with 17 counts of premeditated murder and held without bond. According to an affidavit by the sheriff's office, Cruz confessed to the shooting. It was also claimed Cruz told officers that he brought additional loaded magazines hidden in a backpack. Cruz was placed on suicide watch in an isolation cell, solitary confinement, after the arraignment. Lead defense counsel Gordon Weeks asked Broward Circuit Judge Elizabeth Scherer to recuse herself, claiming that her previous comments and rulings showed favoritism toward the prosecution, which would prevent Cruz from receiving a fair trial. She disagreed and declined the request on February 26th. On November 2nd, 2022, Cruz was sentenced to 34 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one each for the total number of victims murdered and wounded by Cruz.
Today, Cruz appeared emotionless as the judge read the sentencing verdicts, but as she continued naming each of the victims, he seemed to get fidgety. The families comforted each other. Several were in utter disbelief, shaking their heads in disgust. As families left the courtroom, hugs and tears.
I pray that that animal suffers every day of his life in jail.
The idea of prison justice isn't lost on these families.
In prison, I hope and pray he receives the kind of mercy from prisoners that he showed to my daughter and the 16 others. He is going to go to prison.
Cruz apologized to the victim's family and other relatives, promising to do better and fight against drugs every day before bursting into tears.
Yes.
Okay.
May I take off my mask?
Sure.
I am very sorry for what I did, and I have to live with it every day. And that if I were to get a second chance, I will do everything in my power to try to help others. And I am doing this for you, and I do not care if you do not believe me. And I love you, and I know you don't believe me, but I have to live with this every day. And it brings me nightmares, and I can't live with myself sometimes. But I try to push through because I know that's what you guys would want me to do. I hate drugs, and I believe this country would do better if everyone would stop smoking marijuana and doing all these drugs and causing racism and violence out in the streets. I'm sorry, and I can't even watch TV anymore. And I'm trying my best to maintain my composure, and I just want you to know I'm really sorry. And I hope you give me a chance to try to help others. If I believe it's your decision to decide where I go and whether I live or die.
A Massachusetts teenager convicted of fatally stabbing and then decapitating a high school classmate has been sentenced to life in prison. Matthew Borges was 15 years old when he lured his classmate Lee Manuel Viloria Paulino to a secluded area and then stabbed him to death in November 2016. The two boys were both students at Lawrence High School in Massachusetts.
At approximately 5:40 p.m.
Prosecutors say this surveillance video shows Matthew Borges luring 16-year-old Lee Manuel Viloria Paulino away from his Lawrence home back in 2016.
According to prosecutors, Borges was jealous of Viloria Paulino because he had recently started dating Borges' ex-girlfriend. Borges allegedly lured Viloria Paulino to a secluded area near the school, where he stabbed him multiple times. Viloria Paulino was found dead the next day, with his body dismembered.
DeJesus also said Borges would sometimes get jealous.
He yelled at me about me being friendly with Lee.
Also on the stand, Stephanie Soriano. The prosecution read messages they say were between Soriano and Borges.
I think of killing someone and I smirk. I like the sound of it. The idea of causing pain on someone who's getting in my way or who's causing me pain.
In an audio message, the court heard him talk about dead eyes, what it means, and how he will have them soon.
Don't shine full of darkness.
Soriano's testimony isn't over. The two talked up until Lee went.
Borges was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He was convicted in 2018 and sentenced to life in prison. During his sentencing hearing, Matthew Borges remained mostly silent. He did not express remorse or apologize for his actions. Instead, he appeared stoic and emotionless. When the judge sentenced him to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years, Borges showed no visible reaction. 18-year-old Matthew Borges of Lawrence will be eligible for parole in 30 years under the maximum allowable sentence handed down Tuesday by Superior Court Judge Helene Kanzajian. The Matthew Borges case was a shocking crime that involved a young teenager brutally murdering his classmate, Lee Manuel Viloria Paulino, in Lawrence, Massachusetts in 2016. The crime involved a level of violence that shocked the community. Borges was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. The case highlighted the potential for extreme violence among young people and the tragic consequences of such acts. On November 14, 2019, Tia Skinner, a former honor student, was sentenced to life in prison without parole for her role in the brutal attack on her parents in 2010. At the time of the crime, she was just 17 years old. The attack occurred in their home in Yale, Michigan. Paul Skinner, Tia's father, was stabbed to death, while her mother, Mara Skinner, survived multiple stab wounds.
And I lifted my head and looked toward where his voice was because it was dark in our room. And at that moment, I realized that I was being attacked and he was being attacked at the same time.
Skinner's daughter, Tia, is on trial, accused of masterminding a plot to kill her parents because they disapproved of her boyfriend, Jonathan Kurtz. Kurtz and James Preston have already been found guilty of carrying out the attack shortly after midnight on November 12th. Tia Skinner was in the basement of the home with her oldest brother at the time.
We were screaming for our son, Jack.
The evidence presented in court showed that Tia Skinner had meticulously planned the attack. She had orchestrated the event by leaving a window open, providing a map of the neighborhood, and communicating with the assailants through text messages. She even chose the murder weapons, a set of knives. During the sentencing hearing, Tia Skinner expressed remorse for her actions, acknowledging her role in the tragedy. She admitted to being a coward and stated that she could have prevented the attack. However, the judge, Daniel Kelly, remained unmoved. He emphasized the gravity of the crime and the meticulous planning involved. He also noted that Tia Skinner did not come from a disadvantaged background, suggesting that she fully understood the consequences of her actions. The judge's decision to impose a life sentence without parole reflects the severity of the crime and the impact it had on the victim's family. It also highlights the legal consequences of juvenile offenders who commit heinous crimes.
The town of Yale. Skinner, Jonathan Kurtz in the glasses, and James Preston conspired to brutally stab Tia's parents in November of last year. Her father, Paul, was murdered. Her mother, Mara, severely wounded. Here's what the judge said to Tia.
For the premeditated, deliberate murder of your father, you are hereby committed to the Michigan Department of Corrections to be imprisoned for the remainder of your life without any opportunity for parole.
Her two accomplices who carried out the attacks got the same punishment: life for wounding Tia's mother and life without parole for murder. Tia offered an apology, saying she loves.
18-year-old Conrad Schaefer was sentenced for a crime spree in Osceola County that left 2 dead. Conrad Schaefer, 18, pleaded guilty in January to 2 counts of first-degree murder. Schaefer could have been sentenced to 40 years in prison, but instead the judge gave him 2 consecutive life sentences, one for each first-degree murder charge. Schaefer fatally shot David Guerrero, 17, who was on his way to catch a bus for work on June 26, 2013 in Kissimmee. A few days after the killing, Schaefer and 3 of his friends, David Damas, Victoria Rios, and Juan Muriel, forced their way into Eric Rupnerin's Poinciana home, where the 22-year-old was shot and had his throat slit. I was 15 at the time. I'm really sorry for the things I've done, and I know they were wrong, and I know my apology doesn't mean a thing to you. I know it won't change how you feel about me, Schaefer said.
Yes, sir. I would just like to apologize to the families that I've hurt. I know that y'all never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I know if I was in your position, I'd feel the same way. I was 15 at the time. I'm really sorry for the things I've done. And I know I did wrong, and I know my apology don't mean nothing to you. And I know it ain't gonna change how you feel about me. But I just feel like I need to apologize, and I really am sorry for what I've done. And I know I gotta do the time, and I mean, I'm sorry for what I did, but I wish it never happened. I wish I could take it back. I wish I could change things, but I can't. I'm really sorry. I'm sorry to all the families I hurt. I just want to say I hope you guys forgive me one day. I really am sorry.
Kripanen Rupnarine, Eric Rupnarine's grandfather, said Schaefer's apology was not the way to apologize to someone. Dolores Horn, the victim's aunt, said she wished she could take Schaefer out back and hold a gun to his head so he would know how Eric felt. She said Schaefer is worse than an animal. Maybe someday we'll know why people like Mr. Schaefer exist, but for the safety of this community, under that answer is known, Mr. Schaefer can't be free, said prosecutor Jeff Ashton.
But at this point, Your Honor, our position is that the defendant must be sentenced to life in prison with a review hearing in 25 years. If at that point there is some clear understanding of why he committed this crime, then a judge at that point may want to reconsider. But at that 25-year hearing, the court can only reduce the sentence, it can't increase it. And I don't want that judge 25 years from now, if Mr. Schaefer is still as dangerous as he is today, to not be able to keep us safe from him for the rest of his life. So the state's position is the defendant should be sentenced to life in prison for both of these offenses. Whether they're concurrent or consecutive is largely an academic question. We have agreed at the time of the plea, because the interpretation of the statute is still somewhat unknown, that his review hearing of both sentences, whether they are...
Elizabeth Olton was a 9-year-old girl who was murdered by her neighbor, Alyssa Bustamante, who was 15 at the time. In St. Martins, Missouri, on October 21st, Bustamante lured Olton into the woods before strangling and stabbing her to death. Bustamante murdered Olton simply due to homicidal ideation and to see what it was like to kill someone. She was later indicted and pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and armed criminal action and was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of conditional release in 2024 for second-degree murder. However, due to her additional conviction of armed criminal action, even if she was granted conditional release in 2024, which was denied, she will have a consecutive sentence of 30 years in prison. This makes her earliest probable release in 2054, when she will be 60 years old. Olton lived 4 houses down from Bustamante. On October 21st, 2000, Bustamante convinced her younger sister to bring Olton to the forest by their homes to hang out. Upon Olton's arrival, Bustamante strangled Olton, slit her throat, and stabbed her 8 times in the chest. Bustamante then buried Olton's body in a grave that she had dug 5 days before in the woods behind her house and covered the grave with leaves.
For fun.
No one was in that shallow grave.
No Elizabeth. And time is ticking on this missing persons case, now nearing the 48-hour mark. Still, Sergeant Rice is suspicious of this empty hole. He notes it is the perfect size for a small child, just like Elizabeth. Simultaneously, back at Alyssa Bustamante's home,
the FBI obtained that consent to search the Bustamante home, and they had several agents then search different parts of the home. And one of their evidence officers was assigned to search Alyssa Bustamante's room.
And when the
Bustamante's grandparents, Gary and Karen Brooke, took legal custody of her and her 3 younger siblings in 2002, since her mother, Michelle, had addiction issues and her father, Caesar, was serving time in prison. Friends started noticing changes in Alyssa around 2007 when she was hospitalized after a suicide attempt. On her YouTube profile, she listed cutting under her hobbies. She had also posted a photograph of herself on social media where she held 2 fingers to her head, pretending to shoot herself. After the murder on the same day, Bustamante wrote in her journal, though later she attempted to scribble it out, "I just effing killed someone. I strangled them and slit their throat and stabbed them, now they're dead. I don't know how to feel, ATM. It was amazing. As soon as you get over the, oh my god, I can't do this feeling, it's pretty enjoyable. I'm kind of nervous and shaky though, right now. Okay, I gotta go to church now. LOL." Bustamante first appeared in court on November 17, 2009, where she pleaded not guilty and was indicted on first-degree murder and armed criminal action. In January 2012, she took a plea deal to the lesser charges of second-degree murder and armed criminal action.
Supreme Court ruled. She says that ruling changed her thinking.
Basically, the main reason for accepting the offer was to avoid the absolute certainty of life without parole. If there was another option, then there would have been no reason to have accepted that offer.
With the trial about to start, Bustamante's current lawyer suggested the girl was under pressure to make an...
A few weeks later, she was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of conditional release for the murder, and a consecutive sentence of 30 years for armed criminal action. Her appeal against the sentence was denied in March 2014. The victim's mother, Patricia Price, agreed to settle the lawsuit she filed against Bustamante. The terms of the agreement require Bustamante to disclose any compensation from case coverage to Price. Alyssa was seen by several mental health professionals who all testified that she has major depressive disorder and borderline personality disorder. In July 2024, Bustamante was denied parole. Her next parole hearing is expected to take place in 2029. The brutal murder of Barbara Olson, a 78-year-old woman in Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, in September 2012, sent shockwaves through the community. The crime was particularly disturbing as the perpetrators were 2 teenage boys, Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Poppy, both just 13 years old at the time. The horrific incident unfolded on September 17, 2012, when Barbeau and Poppy hatched a plan to rob Olson, who was Barbeau's great-grandmother. Armed with a hatchet and a hammer, they entered Olson's home under the pretense of a visit. Once inside, they launched a savage attack, bludgeoning Olson repeatedly with the weapons. The attack was so violent that Olson sustained 27 injuries, 18 of which were to her head. After the brutal assault, the 2 teenagers ransacked Olson's home, stealing jewelry, a purse, and money. They then attempted to dispose of the body by placing it in the trunk of Olson's car, but were unsuccessful. They eventually abandoned the body in the garage, covering it with a blanket. The following day, Barbeau and Pape were arrested after authorities received a tip. During the investigation, Barbeau confessed to the crime, detailing the gruesome attack and the motive behind it. He claimed that he and Pape had planned the robbery to obtain money for drugs and alcohol. The case against the 2 teenagers proceeded swiftly. Both were charged with first-degree intentional homicide. Barbeau accepted a plea deal and pleaded no contest to the charge, while Pape went to trial. During Pape's trial, Barbeau testified against his former friend, providing crucial details about the crime.
Last September,
we were going to try to scare her to get money and then use force if needed.
And when you say use force if needed, was there a discussion about what type of force you might use?
An attack, I guess to kill.
that was a plan Barbeau says he and his 14-year-old friend Nathan Pop started plotting the day before Olson's death. Barbeau said the two hid the weapons in their pants as Pop's mother drove them near Olson's home. Pop and Barbeau entered through Olson's unlocked garage door.
She knew I was on the run and she said she was going to call my mom.
What happened next?
In August 2014, both Barbeau and Pape were sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 36 years.
Today, Antonio Barbeau will be eligible for parole on his 50th birthday.
Tom Murray was in court today for the sentencing.
This teenager cried several times during his 3-hour sentencing proceeding. Antonio Barbeau will be eligible for parole on his 50th birthday, but that's by no means a guarantee he'll ever get out of prison. Instead of starting his freshman year in high school, 14-year-old Antonio Barbeau will go to prison. He showed varying emotions in court, at times wiping tears from his face. Then Barbeau smirked and shook his head when the prosecutor spoke. He read only a few words from his own statement.
There's a lot going around said by the news, DA, and many other people that I'm a cold, heartless, careless killer. And that's not true.
Barbeau pled no contest and was convicted of killing his great-grandmother. He and his friend bludgeoned Barbara Olson to death with a hatchet and hammer. The prosecutor says the boys stole $150 and used the cash to buy pizza and pot.
They don't care about rehabilitation. They just want to put them away so they can't, they understand the seriousness of the crime.
Barbeau will almost certainly start his prison sentence at the Department of Corrections, Lincoln Hills School for Boys, north of Wausau. Has this crime indeed divided your family?
Yep, sure has. Sure has. Big time. As my mother was the matriarch of the family.
Accomplice and friend Nathan Pop is scheduled to be sentenced in that same courtroom first thing tomorrow morning. In Sheboygan, Tom Murray, today's TM.
The judge presiding over the case described the crime as horrific and senseless and expressed shock that two young boys could commit such a heinous act.
Pop, guilty of first-degree intentional homicide.
14-year-old Nathan Pop guilty of brutally murdering a 78-year-old woman, Barbara Olson.
Jurors got the case at noon, and it only took an hour to convict him.
Cody Holyoke was in the courtroom as the verdict was read. He joins us live from Sheboygan. Cody.
Mike and Carol, I have to say this is a strange trial to cover in that you usually see one side of the courtroom cheer when the verdict is read. Not so in this case. Nathan Pop was only 13 when he and a friend murdered Barbara Olson, and I can tell you from being here today and this week, the ages that we're talking about here, the gravity of that is not lost on the families affected.
Blank faces filled the courtroom. This verdict makes no one happy. Two families are torn apart by a brutal crime, and now two teens will live out their adulthood in prison.
The whole situation is just very sad for everyone.
Nikki Olson is the mother of Antonio Barbeau. The teen, along with his friend Nathan Pop, murdered Barbeau's great-grandmother, Nikki's grandmother, in an attempt to get some fast cash.
It's sad for our family. It's sad for the boys and for Nate's family too.
I walked over to Miss Olson and hit her twice with that hammer.
Nathan Pop admitted to striking the woman with a hammer, but he maintained...
The case of Antonio Barbeau and Nathan Pape has raised numerous questions about the factors that can lead young people to commit such violent crimes. Some experts have pointed to the influence of drugs and alcohol, while others have highlighted the role of mental health issues. Additionally, the case has sparked debate about the appropriate punishment for juvenile offenders and the potential for rehabilitation. In the years since the murder, the case has continued to generate interest and controversy. Some have argued that the life sentences imposed on the two teenagers were too harsh, given their young age at the time of the crime. Others have maintained that the sentences were justified, given the brutality of the murder and the need to protect society. The tragic case of Barbara Olson serves as a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of violence. It also underscores the importance of addressing the root causes of crime, including poverty, inequality, and mental health issues, in order to prevent such tragedies from occurring in the future. If you enjoyed this video, then watch our next one shown on screen.